Welcome to Difference Makers, the podcast that explores people making a difference across planet Earth. I am your host, Joni Readout. On this episode of Difference Makers, I'm here with Brooke Powers. Brooke is the Managing Director of Academics, Equity, and Social Justice for Open Up Resources, where she leads professional development and empowers educators with practical strategies that foster academic excellence through equity and engagement. Prior to her position with Open Up Resources, she was a Milken Educator Award recipient in 2017 for her outstanding work in her middle school math classroom. Thank you for being with us, Brooke. We're excited to hear about your difference maker experiences.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I am a big fan of the podcast. I've listened to some of your latest episodes, and I'm really excited to be here to share.
Thank you. Who are people in your life that have been difference makers, and how have those people been difference makers in your life?
That is such a hard question, I feel like, because there are so many people that have contributed to being a difference maker in my life. So I've had to do some deep soul searching here to figure out, to limit it so that this doesn't become a 6-hour episode of me listing everyone I've ever worked with. The first I would say is someone that most folks would not be familiar with. My uncle was a semi-famous Kentuckian. His name was Bill Kitely. And he actually, for 48 years, was the equipment manager of the Kentucky men's basketball team. So he started out as the assistant, just worked part-time. He was a mailman. And then he worked his way up when, at the time of his death in his 80s, he, never retired, died doing what he loved. He had worked his way up from being the assistant equipment manager to literally sitting next to the head coach of the University of Kentucky men's basketball team on the bench. Was kind of the face. They called him Mr. Wildcat. And the reason he was a difference maker to me is because he worked his way up by just treating people with kindness and respect, having the best attitude. He showed up every day. His goal was, if this was his job, he was going to do the best job he could. And he turned a job that was essentially packing 18-year-olds' bags and doing their laundry into being really a face of Kentucky basketball, which is obviously a huge deal here. He kind of has a famous quote before his death. They did a TV interview with him, and it's kind of interesting that it wasn't long before his death that he actually did this interview. And he said in it, he said, when I die, I want them to inscribe on the monument "to be continued," because I want my legacy to never end. And I thought, what a powerful thing if all of us think of our work as to be continued and more than just what I'm doing today, answering emails or presenting to teachers. If I really think about as a teacher, when I was in the classroom, if I think about my work as something that's to be continued kind of forever with the children I'm teaching, that really helped put a lot of perspective into the things I was doing to me. And I remind myself frequently now that, when I'm grumpy, when I'm tired or beat down, I'm like, but this work continues on beyond me, and it's important to keep digging into it. So he definitely is at the top of my list as a difference maker in my life. And, when he passed away, we actually had his funeral on the floor of Rupp Arena, which is our basketball arena. People lined the streets for miles to pay their respects. And this was somebody that was hired to be a part-time equipment manager. And I think it just went to show that no matter what sort of power or position you have, the way you treat people is your legacy, not just that title or the end result.
What a cool story.
Yes. So that was definitely my first one. And the second one is actually Dr. Christopher Childs, who is in the education space. I'm really lucky. Dr. Childs is actually my boss now, but I was a fan of him for years before. Actually, he came to work at our company because I asked him to be a keynote at our conference. I think in 2020, it was actually when we had to switch to virtual due to COVID. And I can remember having to get on a Zoom call with him. I was so nervous because I'd watched him give Ignite talks. He had really pushed my thinking on Twitter. He was very much a Twitter celebrity to me. And even before I got to work with him, he pushed my thinking so much around equity, around, I think one of the things he always taught me was that silence is complicity in all things. So when I see a situation that I know is an issue and I'm silent, that I am actually complicit in that situation, right? If I'm not stopping what's happening. So I have used that a lot to guide my work and to think about, am I okay? Am I saying this is okay by not saying anything? And he just is a voice for children that have been traditionally marginalized in classrooms. He's always saying, Brooke, who's at the margins that you're not centering? How are you decentering yourself? And he's made me pause so many times to think about who in education's voice is being centered and who we're leaving out. So that's a huge guiding factor in my work, besides the fact that he's just a completely engaging speaker and just, I'm ready to change the world every time I hear him talk. So highly recommend listening to him any chance anybody gets. He is a great social media follow also. And then the last one, some people might think is a little kitschy, but is actually Ted Lasso. So I talk a lot about Ted Lasso right now, but I really do think there are so many great lessons in that show. And I've paused so many times in my own leadership to honestly think about what would Ted Lasso do. So if you're listening and you're not familiar with Ted Lasso, it's a show about an American football coach that goes to England and becomes a soccer coach. But Ted is the epitome of someone that humanizes everyone in the room and looks for the humanness in them, accepts people for who they are, who embraces his own identity. And that's something I've not always been great about, is embracing who I am. And that keeps me from showing up in the way I want to show up. And I think my top lesson that I've learned from Ted Lasso is that he always, when he tells somebody that he appreciates something, he never says, I appreciate it. He always says, I appreciate you. And that's been a great reminder for me to be appreciative and grateful to all the folks I get to work with, and to really focus on the individualities of everyone in my world and what they bring to the table. So all three of those kind of work together to develop my, I guess, leadership style right now.
That's awesome. The point you made about that Dr. Child says silence is complicity. I don't know that I've ever thought about that before. But a pretty powerful line to think about, like stretching our difference maker abilities and making differences for other people and making differences for people that maybe don't have a voice. I don't know before talking to you if I've thought about it in that way.
Never stop thinking about it now, because now I think about it all the time. Even if I'm just in a simple situation, I'm like, oh, but silence is complicity. Like, am I going to say something right now? Do I think this is okay, or do I not think it's okay? Sometimes people probably wish I would be silent, but I do think that's a big part about being a difference maker, is taking a risk, especially when you have positional power or privilege to get to push for folks that don't have that.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay. So thinking about that, I think that's what the people say to me the most, or people that I interview and talk to, is that is hard to narrow that down, right? To people that have been difference makers in your life. But I think this next one is possibly even more challenging, just because it makes us reflect on us and who we are, and saying, like, I am a difference maker. So how have you been a difference maker in the lives of others?
Yeah, that one is a really hard question to think about, because I feel like it's really hard, like you said, to reflect on what you've done. It's much easier to focus on what you haven't done in my world. I feel like, I think the first way that I've been a difference maker is I just am really passionate about children and teachers. So one shift I have made in myself is I no longer call them students. Dr. Childs actually pushed me to make that change also, because students sound so cold, right? It's so easy to think of students as just bodies and seats. But when you think about children, right? The vast majority of the bodies in our classroom are children. They're under the age of 18. They are, by definition, children. And when I think of children and I think of someone's child and I think of my own children, it humanizes them. So I think switching that language has really helped me, and honestly allowed me to be a difference maker in the way that I am able to really center children at the heart of everything I do. And then on the flip side of that, also centering teachers. So I am someone who is really passionate about finding ways for teachers to stay in the classroom and elevate their careers. When I left the classroom, did not want to leave the classroom. It's a long story, but a little bit was forced out by a bad curriculum adoption. It was just something I didn't want to use. I wasn't comfortable with it. And drew a line in the sand and made a big, bold move. But in addition to that, I also felt like, after I won the Milken Award, I didn't know what was next for me in teaching. I'm someone who's very driven and was like, well, but now if I've done this, what's next? I didn't want to be a principal. I didn't want to be a
I
coach. I don't
see.
want to,
Yeah.
yes, didn't want to be a superintendent. I was somewhat interested in maybe being a curriculum coach if I could stay in the classroom and I wanted to be like a model classroom of sorts and let
Mhm.
teachers come in. It wasn't an option where I was. And I was a single mom at the time, so there was no way for me to commute further, etc. I needed to be where my children were. And so when I left the classroom, I said, whatever I do, wherever I go, I'm going to find ways to give teachers more opportunities. And so that's been a big part of my job originally at Open Up before I was in this position is we built communities around our curriculum. First of all, because teachers need a support network. And I've seen our communities do such amazing things. I'll never forget, like one year, it was right before school was about to start. It was in August, and this panic teacher posted in our Facebook group and was like, I have to have emergency surgery. What am I going to do? I'm going to be out for 6 weeks. And random strangers made her sub plans for her. They all just started commenting. We're like, I'll take days 1 through 3. I'll take 5 through 10. And they crowdsourced sub plans. And I thought, this is what teachers need, right? So
Yes.
outside of communities, I also wanted to find paid opportunities for teachers. So I started a community coach program where teachers using and implementing our curriculum actually contract with us to provide support to other teachers using the curriculum. So they get paid a monthly stipend to host free virtual PLCs and to comment in the Facebook groups and to make resources so they can stay in the classroom, elevate themselves, but also make a little extra money, right? Get a little extra
Yeah.
recognition. And then from that program, we developed what we call the Teacher Leader in Residence program at Open Up. And that is a program for teachers to stay in the classroom, but become professional learning facilitators with us. So, especially in the summer, we contract with teachers to travel around the country, help district, other schools, teachers like them with launch support during the school year. Some of them still travel during the school year, depending on their flexibility, but they also do virtual sessions, one-on-one coaching. And that has been such a mutually beneficial relationship because, first of all, teachers are getting to do something they're passionate about and elevating themselves. But also on our end, it has elevated our professional learning so much because I don't know about you, but I've sat in so many PL sessions where I had questions or I was like, but that I don't know how that would happen in my classroom. And the facilitator couldn't answer that. And when
Yes.
you have a real classroom teacher who's taught the curriculum, they can say, I totally get it. This is what I had to do. And so that I feel like has really been a way I've been able to be a difference maker, both for the teachers who come to collaborate with us, but then also for the teachers they go to serve because they're able to have this meaningful relationship with a teacher from across the country that's walked in their shoes. And I would say the last way is just back to that children piece. In my current role, we develop reading and math curriculum that's freely accessible. But now I am able to really think about whose voices are missing in that curriculum and ask myself that, decentering again myself, thinking about like, is this math context applicable to all children? Or is it just, did I write this because it was applicable to me, right? Like stopping the whole talking about buying 36 watermelons and 12 bunches of bananas and starting to think about like, what do kids actually care about? They care about TikTok, they care about fast food, they care about sneakers, and using that to open doorways to mathematics for them as opposed to just your traditional, Kareem Kayani is another great follow that developed the company Citizen Math, but he always says that if you look at traditional math books now, you go back and you look at a textbook from the early 1900s, it's the same problems. They just switched. It's like, we're not stacking straw bales now, we're stacking Legos, but the problem's the same. Change the context a little bit. So actually thinking about what interests children and how does their interest drive their ability to access the mathematics.
Some big time programs elevating teachers, which comes from our Milken work, right?
It
Like that's
does.
why I
I
get to
so
elevate
much.
people.
It definitely does. I would say, if I was going to add another difference maker, it really would be the folks at Milken. I don't know that I would have been brave enough to leave the classroom before Milken. getting to connect with just that whole community of educators. And like, that's what brought another person I could have named was Principal Kafele, who just I
Oh,
could listen to all day, every day. But seeing the passion and the bold steps, that whole power of the pen thing that Milken says all the time really did empower me to feel like I could take risks that I never felt like I could before.
yeah. And it sounds like that you're still doing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I carry it with me all the time. I wear my pen when I can, when I'm wearing a blazer, and occasionally folks ask me about it, but even when they don't, I don't there's a little bit of empowerment in that of like I can do this. I'm brave, I'm strong, all the things, but those are definitely the things Milken taught me as well.
Yes. Okay. So as we think about people that are difference makers in your life and how you've been a difference maker in the lives of others, if you were to make a list of attributes that you see in people who are difference makers, what would those be?
So the first one I would say is conviction. Like you have to believe in what you're trying to make a difference in. I could not make the same difference in a non-educated education related field right now because what I'm passionate about is education, right? So it's easy for me to be excited to get up in the morning to want to make change. And so I think that's the very first key to being a difference maker is finding where you actually want to make a difference. The second attribute is, I think, being humble enough to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you and are better at executing than you. I, joke all the time that I know just enough about things to be dangerous. And then I have surrounded myself with a team that makes me look brilliant because they are all passionate about their own areas. I was a math teacher. I was not an ELA person. So I've had to train myself in the ELA world. But also by doing that, I've had to surround myself with people that I trust who I know have the same beliefs that I have. And the third thing I would say is being reflective. I think there's so much in being a difference maker that is being reflective, that's constantly interrogating yourself and your beliefs. Like, do I still believe this? Is this still okay? In 20 years, am I going to want to stand behind this? Is I actually, at the end of every day, I reflect on my day and I think about, is there anyone I did not hear out today? Is there anyone that came to me that I blew off or was defense? Like feedback is so hard, right? So when my team
Yeah.
is giving me feedback, is
Yeah.
there anyone that I was not, when they gave me feedback, I did not handle it like I should have? Is there anyone I didn't follow up with? I think focusing internally on yourself as a leader is how you become a difference maker externally, and knowing that you always have to be working on yourself. I'm still a work in progress. I learn every day. I never, like, I tell folks all the time, like if I had all the answers, I would write a book, be like a quadrillionaire, because it would have all the answers to everything in education in it. And I would hand it to schools and be like, you're fixed. Education's fixed for you. I don't have those. I have to keep learning. The world keeps changing. I hadn't taught since COVID. And so I realized I was becoming a little bit irrelevant. I wasn't happy with myself when I was giving advice to schools and districts because I didn't know what it was like. So I volunteer in a school now on Fridays and teach because, again, I wanted to reflect on how is this different now? What do I not know? What do I need to learn from these teachers? So really pushing yourself to never be settled into who you are right now, and always focusing on, you're not just growing other leaders. You have to keep growing yourself as a leader, or you can't be effective with other folks.
That's a powerful list. Conviction, humble, reflective.
Yes. I think those are the trifecta I would pick right now, but I'm always learning. So tomorrow it might be a different list, but today that's my list.
That's a powerful list. And I'm gonna have to look into Ted Lasso. I know your like presentations and stuff. And so the last podcast I was listening to it, and I started to Google, like, okay, let me figure out what this is all about.
So good. And the other thing I think that's part of being a difference maker is so the writers, part of Ted Lasso is he builds trust with his team, and that's how he changes things. But the writers of Ted Lasso, one of the biggest lessons I learned is the writers of Ted Lasso over time were able to push more and more issues and push the audience's thinking. But they were able to do that because they built trust over time and the audience bought into them. And what another key leadership characteristic, right, is building that trust over time, working with folks to see your vision, to see what you're doing, so that then when you take that big, bold step, or you push someone else to take that big, bold step, they trust you to do it and not just hope for the best. Like, they know that, like, if Brooke is pushing me to do this, there's a reason for it.
I want to thank my guest today, Brooke Powers, and all of our listeners, because the real question here today is, how will you be a difference maker? How are you a difference maker? Is it some of the same things that Brooke is doing, or maybe something you want to do differently? We want to invite you to be a part of the conversation about how you are a difference maker, or people who are difference makers in your life. Remember, you have the ability to be a difference maker in the lives of others, and others need you. We impact people on a daily basis. Why not be the difference maker in the lives of others?